Ed Levine is the founder and overlord of the food enthusiast blog Serious Eats, as well as creator and host of the Serious Eats podcast, Special Sauce. In 2016, Ed was inducted into the James Beard Foundation's Who's Who of Food and Beverage in America. He's a food writer whose stories on iconic American foods such as pizza, hot dogs, hamburgers, ice cream, and cheesecake have appeared in many U.S. periodicals, including GQ and the New York Times. He's the author of New York Eats and New York Eats More, both guides to the best non-restaurant food in New York City. And in 2005, he commemorated pizza's centennial in America by consuming 1,000 slices for the collection Pizza, A Slice of Heaven. He will be joined in conversation tonight by Kenji López-Alt, the chief culinary consultant of Serious Eats and the author of the James Beard Award-nominated column, The Food Lab, in which he unravels the science of home cooking. A restaurant-trained chef and former editor at Cook's Illustrated magazine, Kenji released his first book, The Food Lab, Better Home Cooking Through Science, in 2015, which went on to become a New York Times bestseller and the recipient of a James Beard Award, and was named Cookbook of the Year in 2015. And I know they have a few copies of it down at the book larder table if you'd like to pick that one up tonight, too. But they're here tonight to discuss this new book from Ed Levine, with a foreword by Kenji, Serious Eater, a food lover's perilous quest for pizza and redemption, the subject of tonight's talk. Please join me in giving a warm town hall welcome to Ed Levine and Kenji López-Alt.
Wow, man, we better say something cosmically smart here, Kenji.
There's a lot of people here.
There's a lot of people. Seattle, you make us feel very welcome.
Well, speaking of being made to feel welcome. So yesterday, Ed and I were we were in LA a week ago. We were in San Francisco a little while ago, and then we were in Portland yesterday. So this was a kind of experience I was kind of used to when I was living in New York and still working at Serious Eats, and would go out regularly with Ed Levine. But what happened was we went to Culinary, which is a restaurant done by Gabriel Rucker's restaurant. He has Le Pigeon. It's Culinary. They do
great Portland chef.
Yeah, and they do kind of fancy downscale food. They do these steamed burgers. They call.
If you're ever in Portland, you need to go to Culinary for steamed burgers. I know they sound weird, but they're not. They're delicious.
Yeah, so they're like ground meat where he mixes French onion soup mix in with them, and then smashes them, and then puts them onto these Hawaiian rolls with this pickle relish, bread and butter pickle relish, and then puts them in a steamer and steams them for like 30 seconds, and they're really delicious. Anyhow, we were there, and then Gabriel Rucker, the chef, comes out, and he sees Ed, and he's like Ed Levine. And apparently, I think the last time Ed was there was like 12 years ago.
It's true.
But then Gabriel sat at our table, and it was as if we were all old friends, and he was talking about how Ed Levine had changed his career when he was younger, and then later that day we went to a Pizza Scholl's, which is a very good pizza, and Brian
Spangler.
Yeah, Brian Spangler, the owner there, also hadn't seen Ed for 12 years. But same thing, came over and sat down and started talking with us. Yeah, and apparently Ed had changed his career at some point too.
Yeah.
Anyhow, this is like a common thing you find when you hang out with Ed Levine, is that when you go out to eat, you're going to find people, no matter where you go, whatever restaurant you walk into, there's someone's going to walk up and be like, Ed, like, oh, you changed my career when by doing this thing you did.
Until Kenji worked for me for a few years, then we'd go into restaurants and they'd say, who's the big guy with Kenji?
But so I guess I guess my question for you is, when you were starting Serious Eats, what was the media landscape like, both for
Sure.
online and for print media, and why Serious Eats at that time?
You know, for me...
And this was in 2000...
In 2006, or actually I started blogging in 2005. So for me, I was a reasonably successful freelance writer. I was writing for the Times. I wrote 2 editions of New York Eats. I wrote a book, which my friend Tom Douglas told me is the worst-selling book he's ever written, a book called Tom's Big Dinners with Tom Douglas, who is a good friend who we just had a drink with. And
yeah, it happens in Seattle, too.
Yeah, it happens in Seattle, too. It's true. But, you know, in 2005, so what happened was I was coming off I thought I was going to be starting a competitor to the Food Network for MTV Networks.
It was called
Gusto. And at the last second, they decided not to go forward with it. But in doing Gusto, I started reading a lot of food blogs. And the one thing I realized about food blogs was you could write about whatever you wanted to write about, and no one could say no. And so I love that. I love the idea that there was no more pitching. I just had to pitch myself. So this was what a pitch meeting at Serious Eats is like. Ed, I want to do a story on fried clams. Great idea, Ed. Do it. You know, so that was really the impetus for Serious Eats. It was like I could get rid of the gatekeepers because, and Kenji was a freelance writer too. You spend as much time selling your ideas for stories as you do writing them. And so when you start blogging, as I did, it was like, this is the coolest thing ever. You write whatever you want to write, you hit send, and it flies all over the world in real time. It was almost alchemical. It was magical. And so I was just so taken by it, that I didn't realize what a ridiculous business proposition it was. And so, because all the other food bloggers at the time a lot of them came out of the tech world. Elise Bauer from Simply Recipes worked at Apple. Heidi Swanson from 101 Cookbooks had also come out. I think she and her sister had started some tech company that they'd sold. David Leibovitz wasn't a technologist, but he was the pastry chef at Chez Panisse. And then there was me. I was just a guy who had a lot of ideas and a lot of passion and thought that people would sort of read what I had to write and that I could gather people like Kenji, and then all of a sudden I could have a business. And there were, I don't know if any of you remember, but like in 2005, this was right when the Huffington Post was getting started, right? So it was like, oh, blogs are the future of publishing. And I put every one of those quotes in my business plan. You know, it was like, blogs were the future of publishing. And I drank the Kool-Aid. And all of a sudden, people started, and my first chief technology officer, this is a technology-oriented town, was David Karp, who became the founder of Tumblr. So it's not in his bio because it was too insignificant, but it's the truth. I'm telling you, it's the truth. And it was just the greatest thing. And the weird thing was we started with an advertiser through a set of coincidences. American Express was our launch advertiser in 2006. So it's like, how hard could this be? You know, I have American Express and I haven't even started yet. And then it was like, oh, but American Express takes 6 months to pay their bills. I didn't really figure this out. And so so it was this roller coaster ride because the highs, the creative highs, were amazing, and the lows, as you pointed out in your forward, were not so amazing.
Right.
And you could. I have a terrible poker face, okay? I'm going to say that right now. My son says I have the worst poker face in the world. And so Kenji says that everyone
we could tell how much we owed the bank on any given day by how, like if you took a graph of Ed's shoulder height as he walked into the office that morning, it just tracked our finances.
Yeah, it's true. It's true. And I don't know why, I just figured if I wrote projections in the business plan that's what would happen. Yeah, that projections were reality. I didn't realize that business plans are basically semi-fictional, right? My brother, who was my first investor, said that the numbers in a business plan have to be aggressive but plausible. So that was my mantra for everything that was in the business plan. It was like, and in year 3 we're going to have $40 million in sales, because that was the other thing was, I couldn't really admit to myself or investors that really what I wanted their money for was that so I could have my dream job. Because people don't write you $100,000 checks so you can have your dream job. Or,
Can you talk about where, when you started Serious Eats, where was money, as far as publishing?
Yeah.
Where was the money coming from? Who was it going to?
Well,
how were
again,
people getting paid for writing things?
There was, advertisers took much longer to pay because they had all the leverage, right? And in fact, they still often can take much longer to pay. Fortunately, the people who bought Serious Eats are much better business people than I am. Some of them are here tonight. Thank you. But it was always a problem. So cash flow was always a problem. And, and what I didn't figure was that, yes, big media businesses, old media businesses like the New York Times and Condé Nast, yes, they were struggling with the internet to make sense of it, right? Because first of all, the whole idea that content was free was anathema to Condé Nast or the New York Times, right? It's like, content can't be free. And we were like, content it can be free, and we'll just aggregate a big enough audience to sell it to advertisers. And again, there was all this talk in the business press about all the money migrating to the web, which was true, but it quickly became clear that wasn't going to be the answer to Serious Eats' continuing set of fiscal problems. So it was just
and is that because the way the money was getting to content producers was broken, or that
and
there
also
were
it was
gatekeepers?
There was a bunch of things. One, it was the law of supply and demand. There were quickly more ad impressions available online than there were advertisers that were interested. So that drove the price of advertising down, right? And that was the other thing, that the reason the New York Times has gone through so much downsizing, and they seem to be at a kind of a state of equilibrium at the moment. And I love the New York Times, greatest newspaper in the world. But they were hemorrhaging jobs because the cost to buy a set of eyeballs online was 1/10 what they could charge for print. So you can imagine what that did to their business, right? It was like all of a sudden, it was like there were a lot of places that you could buy the same audience. That was the other thing that was happening. as a result of digital media, right? Because in the old days, where else could you buy that affluent, educated, sophisticated audience but the New York Times? And they were the New York Times, right? One of the greatest media brands in the history of this country. So, but, I was convinced that the revolution was coming, and we were going to tear down the walls and before they could figure it out. And so that's what fueled my passion.
So what you found, I mean, so on the one hand, there were fewer gatekeepers. It was much easier to get your work or anybody's to get their work in front of more eyeballs. But because of that, it also meant that there was a lot of more stuff going out in front of the same eyeballs, which meant it was harder to get money.
Yes, and because advertisers had their choice, right?
Right. So as a business, on Serious Eats, like how did you? What were your plans for tackling that problem, for attracting, I guess, the money to?
So for us, I just figured if we continued to publish stories that I loved and believed in, whether I wrote them or you wrote them or somebody else wrote them, that we were building enough scale, not scale like Facebook scale or Microsoft scale or whatever, but enough scale that it would be appealing to advertisers, even though it would be by definition a niche buy. And every time I would hit a number in terms of traffic, they'd say, well, you need 1 million unique visitors a month to get big companies interested. And then I'd hit 1 million. It's like, no, man. You need 3 million. Then I'd hit 3 million. No, you need $5 million if you want the Pepsis or Cokes or Budweisers of the world. And then it would keep going up. It was like Lucy with the football, and Peanuts. Every time I went to kick the football, somebody pulled the football back.
Yeah.
And so that was another problem. And then the last problem was when I started Serious Eats, Facebook was barely selling advertising. It started selling advertising in 2004. I started Ed Levine Eats in 2005. They sold $474,000 worth of advertising in 2004. By 2014, when I decided that I had to sell Serious Eats, or that I wanted to sell Serious Eats, Facebook was, I think, up to $14 billion. So that, and it's very hard to compete with that level of scale and targeting and all the things that Facebook can offer.
Right.
So,
can you talk about, I guess, like the personal values that you had when you started Serious Eats, and the values that you wanted to bring to the business, and then maybe talk about if those values ever had to change or got challenged.
Sure. I mean, look, I'm a proud red diaper baby. I don't know how many of you know what a red diaper baby is. So both my parents grew up very, very poor in New York and went to City College and joined the Communist Party. So red diaper babies were children of those communists from the 30s. And so I grew up in a family of missionaries, like politically active. My mother wrote a column, a progressive feminist column for our local paper in 1963. So I grew up in this kind of environment. So I was not born and bred to be Jeff Bezos. I don't know. Is he here? Okay, okay, good. So so when I went to hire people, those are the values I had. They were my parents' values. And so I tended to look for people that shared my values. And
low prices and convenient service?
What?
Low prices and convenient service?
Yeah, exactly. Kenji just says low prices because I paid him $25 a story when I started. By the way, it was $5 more than I was paying everybody else.
It's true.
So, so when I was hiring people, I gravitated towards people who shared my values. And that was one of the great pleasures, because I'd never started a business before. And I turned out to be pretty good at identifying talent. It actually was the most surprising thing that I derived the most satisfaction from in Serious Eats was, giving people like Kenji, a launch pad and just saying, if I would just say, Kenji, just write what you're passionate about, because that's what I did at Serious Eats, and so, but those values were often challenged, right? Because advertisers required TLC. Sometimes they would ask that, we'd write stories about their products and not label them as, and these are things that digital publishers still face today, sponsored content, and, everyone does sponsored content.
And sponsored content, when you started Serious Eats, that wasn't even a concept.
No,
that existed.
But it just developed, and now the New York Times does sponsored content, and we do sponsored content, and it's clearly labeled as such. But I remember more than one time when you and I would go out for coffee, and you'd be really annoyed, and you'd say, "I'm not for sale." So I was like, "What do you mean?" He goes, "You want me to do stories for about eggs for the National Egg Council, or whatever. It could be any advertiser." And so, but the thing is that I was kind of on their side, and so that was the struggle, right? Because I identified more with you and the other writers that I did.
Because you were a writer.
Yeah, exactly. So, for me, it was just like, yeah, he kind of has a good point here, And so that's sort of, I was dealing with that challenge throughout the 9 years I owned Serious Eats. It was like, can I still hold these values? And still make a success. And it's one of the greatest things about Serious Eats is that we did. Our values remain the same today, even with Fexi Media owning us as they have been when I owned it. And that's pretty great. And it's not that, it's pretty unusual, So, thank you, Fexi Media. It's a miracle that you came along. But it's also, I think it is good business in the end, but there's a lot of ways you can take a wrong turn.
Mm-hmm. What about, like from a story, just from Serious Eats, when you read your book, it reads like a fiction novel.
It's true.
And I don't know how much of that is because it is, but it does read like one. But that it just makes me think about like when at Serious Eats. My impression was that your goal was always to get people to write stories, as opposed to no matter what it was, whether it was about like eating 1 million tacos or cooking 1,000 eggs.
I wanted us all to be storytellers.
Yeah, can you tell us, I guess, a bit about your writing process?
Sure.
And
so, for me, it was
process.
always, I love telling stories in every medium. I've had television shows and radio shows, and now I have a podcast. We have Serious Eats. And that was...
music producer, too?
Yeah, that's right. Dr. John, may he rest in peace, I got to produce 2 solo piano records, which are really great. I'll listen to, and because I spent many years in the music business being a missionary for jazz and the blues before I was a missionary of the delicious. I was a different kind of delicious. So, so I kind of just felt that. Wait, what was your question again, Kenji?
I don't remember now. Oh, how about your story writing process?
Oh yeah. So for me, it was just like I never took a journalism class. I never even took a fiction writing class or anything. But I used to inhale newspapers. I read 3 newspapers a day growing up, and so I understood the structure of a story, and what went into good reporting. I never took a journalism class. And so that's what I tried to get everybody to do. And it's one of your gifts. It's not just that you're this great and influential recipe developer, but you're a great storyteller. And that's what I look for. And that's another thing that I think separates Serious Eats from other food blogs, from other food publications, is we have really good storytellers, and I take a lot of pride in that. And what's weird about the book is that I couldn't imagine in my wildest dreams that I could write a book-length nonfiction narrative, and it is nonfiction, Kenji, okay? It's the truth. But the weird thing is, when I first started writing the book, I was like, I'm going to write a prescriptive business book. And then, someone said, yeah, the subtitle would be How Not to Start a Business. And so, often when you write a book, and I don't know if this is true about Food Lab, it's like, I really didn't know what the book was about until it was done. And
yeah,
it's like,
same.
Yeah, and it's a weird thing. And it is almost an alchemical process, and because you think you know where you're supposed to go, and you're supposed to, you're hitting all the beats you want to hit, and then all of a sudden you find yourself somewhere you never imagined being when you finish the book, and that's exactly what happened with the book, and the book was also a love story. It was a story. I was trying to recreate a family that, for various reasons that when you read the book, you'll discover I lost with the staff. And it was a love story about my brother who adopted me and who was the first investor in Serious Eats. And then it was also a love story about my wife, because my wife, I only give one piece of advice to anyone who gets married, which is that you marry up and you hang on for dear life. And so, because I couldn't let Serious Eats die. It was like the roller coaster was really, and I hate roller coasters, but it was a 9-year roller coaster ride, and my wife.
And what were you exactly risking? Worst?
You can't borrow money if you're a small business without personally guaranteeing it. And in my case, that number kept growing. And they always tell you, if you read any business book, and I even went to business school, I have an MBA, and they always tell you, never use your line of credit for operating expenses. I must have missed that class, because that's what we constantly did. Well, first of all, I didn't have a choice, and like the idea that a line of credit should only be for new initiatives, like, what? The only initiative we had was stay alive. You know, that was the new initiative, that was the old initiative, that was all the initiatives, like how to keep this thing alive. So, you know, and my wife was amazing because I literally was betting the ranch. And I kept going to her and I said, oh, this is the last time I'm gonna come to you to increase the line of credit. And I think I went up to her 4 or 5 times until there's like, okay, this is really the last time, and I could tell that she meant it, and I just didn't want to put her through any more hell than I already had, you know, and so the book is really for her, you know, and you know, this is, when we've been doing this, there's a few pages that I read that will explain what she did for me and how I tried to make it right. It was really hard. So here it is. With the deal really done, I had to take stock of the collateral damage Serious Eats had done to my relationships with both Vicky and Mike. Mike's my brother who died. The fight to keep Serious Eats alive had been a grueling 9-year battle, and like most battles, it had left some wounds that still hadn't healed. I mistakenly thought at the time that the proceeds of the sale would wipe away all of Vicky's conflicted feelings about the whole Serious Eats saga. The rewards were worth the risks, weren't they? But I couldn't wipe the slate clean. Why? Because when I learned about the relationship between risk and reward in business, no teacher at Columbia Business School spoke to the collateral, emotional, and psychological damage associated with the risks you take to reap the rewards. That damage, it turns out, is really difficult to repair. Vicky thought I didn't give credit where credit was due. She was wrong, maybe one of the only things she's been wrong about in 35 years of marriage. It was true that I couldn't entirely admit how instrumental she'd been, and it's true that I was too dumb to really give credit where it was due. But it's also true that I literally can't imagine what it would have been like to do this without her, and I'm keenly aware that it wouldn't have worked if she hadn't been on my side. In fact, the most harrowing details I've had to relive in writing this book have nothing to do with financial security, only the terrifying knowledge of how close I came to doing real damage to the relationship that made it all possible. For the 9 long years that it took to get Serious Eats off the ground, in fact, long before that and after, I relied every single day on Vicky's solid judgment, her business savvy, her good counsel, her sense of humor, and her preternatural calm. Her unwavering belief in me was and is humbling. I do not for a moment downplay the difficulty of the situations I put her in or the tremendous sacrifice she had to make. Which isn't to say that I was any good at communicating any of this at the time. So we kept fighting. More than a year after I sold the business, we had yet another argument that ended without a resolution, neither of us giving an inch. I got on my bike and I rode to Tiffany. I'd never been inside Tiffany, so I had no idea what to do when I went through the revolving doors. I asked the person stationed right inside the door where I could buy pearl earrings for my wife. Vicky had been talking about how much she'd wanted a pair of pearl earrings for years, even before Serious Eats. A kindly saleswoman showed me a variety of diamond and pearl earrings. I picked a pair out for Vicky. It's not a bad metaphor, a piece of grit in an oyster shell, a lot of work to make something that looks so effortlessly beautiful. She opened the box like a kid opening a present on Christmas morning. Vicky grinned from earring to earring as she walked over to a mirror to try them on. I almost started to cry, mostly out of frustration at myself. Why had it taken me so long to get to this place I obviously needed to be? Pride, stupidity, stubbornness, no matter. I made it. Let the healing begin. It continues to this day. So, you know, that's that's the love story part of Serious Eats. And you know, it's great to be talking about Serious Eats and that it had a great outcome, and it was bought by this wonderful company, Fexi, based in Seattle, and we get to do what we do, and all the people that have come through Serious Eats have gone on to do great things like Kenji, and that's such a great pleasure. And it's I think one of the morals of the story is that maybe you don't have to be a jerk to succeed in business, and I wouldn't change those 9 crazy years for anything.
That's actually what I was going to ask you. Would you, knowing like all the trouble you had during those 9 years, and especially the problems you had at home and with your family, and I guess also the troubles you put your brother through for his last years, like, is there, I went in a much smaller and shorter scale, went through similar troubles, like when I was opening my restaurant, and wasn't paying as much attention to my family as I wanted to, and so I often ask myself like whether I would do it again if I went back. And what about you? Do you think it was worth it? Is it?
Yes, it was worth it, but I wouldn't do it again. I once went to an engagement party for another former Serious Eater, former managing editor, Carrie Jones, and her father is a VC in the Valley, in the Silicon Valley. And as we were leaving the party, this is after we had sold the business, her father said to me, "Let me know if you want to start another business, Ed. I'll invest." And Vicky turned to him and said, "He's not starting another business." So I wouldn't do it again, but I can't imagine not having done it. I don't know if that makes sense. It's sort of, it is the most terrifying and alternately thrilling thing I've ever done, and also the most satisfying.
So what is your secret sauce, your secret business sauce? Like, I guess let's do it. You've talked a lot about your values. I guess your secret sauce, and you talked about how you write stories and your approach to story writing. Maybe like, I don't know, what have we not talked about?
I think if anything, it was this weird combination of optimism and resilience. So I am wired to be an optimist. And because of circumstances in my life that you'll all read about, I was sort of forced to be resilient well before anyone should have to be resilient. So it was that combination of optimism and resilience that got me through the crazy moments where I just refused to lose, And I remember I once had a meeting with a friend of mine, Maxwell Gillingham Ryan, who owns Apartment Therapy, and he had a friend who was a banker, and he said, "Congratulations on the Serious Eats." It was like 2011. There was nothing really to congratulate us on. It was a good site, but and he asked me, well, what do you attribute your success to? And I said, well, I really like to win. And he said, you know what? That's bullshit. He said, everybody likes to win. It's the people that refuse to lose that most often get across the finish line. And I think, if anything, the secret sauce is the optimism, the resilience, and the just crazy and irrational refusal to lose. Mm-hmm. I think that's the best way to put it. So, that's it. That's the story of Serious Eats. You still have to read the book, though.
What about, I'm going to do your podcast questions to you.
Yeah.
Your last meal with anybody living or dead, no family members?
Okay. So my last meal, so that there's...
And you can't reuse previous answers either.
I can't use, oh man, come on, Kenji, you're killing me. Okay, I'm gonna do it. So no previous answers. Sonny Rollins has to be at my Last Supper.
Okay.
I don't know if Sonny is still with us. He can't play anymore, but Sonny was one of my music heroes. So Sonny Rollins. I would say that since I usually say Betty Carter, but you told me I can't use who's a great jazz singer.
I was going to say, Sonny Rollins can't be that good if he wasn't invited to your first dinner.
Right, that's true. And then I would say that Ella Fitzgerald would have to be at my Last Supper. And maybe, well, I don't know if there would be, and then, I don't know how I used them before, but can I use like two people I used before? Sure. All right. So Nora Ephron, who wrote and directed Sleepless in Seattle, who is one of my writing heroes and participated in both a pastrami tasting at Serious Eats and a biscuit tasting. If you go on the site, they're still on there. I just love Nora as a writer and as a human being. Not that I knew her well. If you really look closely in Julia, you'll see the back of my head. You probably won't recognize it. And then the other writer is Calvin Trillin, who I tend to gravitate towards conversational, elegant writers, and Nora and Bud Trillin have the ability to communicate in the most direct way possible.
What's Trillin's line about hamburgers? About how anybody who doesn't think, is that his?
No, is it about hamburgers or anybody who doesn't think
I thought it was anyone who doesn't think their hometown has the best burgers.
Yes.
Ever is a wuss or something.
Is a wuss, exactly. It's true. And what we'd be eating, we'd probably be eating your smash burgers, Stella Park's cherry pie, maybe Gritzer's risotto, although your risotto is pretty good too, I gotta say. And some barbecue. God, that's hard. Where would the barbecue be from? And there has to be some Crispianco pizza.
Okay.
From Phoenix.
I think you only listed 4 people who were coming, by the way.
I know, but this is what it's like to eat with me, dude, okay? And then maybe some Aaron Franklin brisket,
Okay, yeah, Aaron Franklin.
So, yeah, that's probably what we'd be eating.
What other questions do you ask on your
show?
What's your
what
last
would be
one?
happening on Ed Levine Day all over the world?
What's National Ed Levine Day?
Well, on National Ed Levine Day, people might be listening to either Dr. John or Sonny Rollins or B.B. King, and of which only Sonny is with us. And they would be eating probably, they'd be eating together, and there would be dancing, and there would even be karaoke.
Oh, good.
He's the one who schooled me in karaoke, and the rest of the Serious Eaters too. So my jam is Midnight Train to Georgia. Don't ask me to do it. Okay, please don't ask me to do it. I haven't had enough alcohol today. But Kenji, uniquely among the Serious Eaters, well, Paul wasn't bad.
Paul was great.
Yeah, but Kenji can actually sing his butt off. Yeah, he can sing band songs. I don't know if it's good as the band, but really well. He can sing Beatles songs really well. He's actually got a great voice. He comes from a very musical family.
So back to the dinner.
Yeah.
Ed Levine Day, there'd be karaoke and then.
Yeah, there'd be karaoke. There'd be great music, and there would be fried chicken, pizza, barbecue, and pie.
Okay. It sounds like your last dinner too.
Exactly, but That'd be a great day, wouldn't it? Wouldn't that be a great day, like in Seattle or anywhere?
I think we're out
Yeah.
of time, but if anyone in the audience has questions, there.
I think there are microphones on both sides.
Yeah. Feel free to come up.
Yeah.
You mentioned Chris. Would it still be Chris Bianco's pizza 10 years later?
It probably still would. There would probably be, I would have to think about whether it would be Chris's or Anthony Mangieri of Una Pizza Napolitana in New York. But it'd probably still be Chris's. I not only love Chris's pizza, but I love, I wrote a book about pizza and I put one small part of it in my book, which is, Chris late at night once told me when I said, "What are you trying to do with your pizza?" And he just said something that was so cosmically correct. He said, "I'm trying to do one small thing right." And I thought, God, what a great answer and what a great thing to aspire to do in your life, to do one small thing right.
And one last simple question. Kairos or Alfredo's?
Oh my God. Wow, are you from the Five Towns, dude? Kairos. Okay, even, Kairos, so in my family we had Kairos pizza and steak. I don't know why my parents thought that was a good combination. On Sunday nights, we had steak and pizza. Oh, China Jade, for sure.
I think on this side now.
I got one real quick question. What's the ideal at-home pizza oven temperature? Because I want to build one myself, and I want to get that thing blazing hot. And is there any place around here to get a good slice? Because I don't think I've really found one yet.
It's funny, we've just had some good pizza.
Yeah, not a slice. I mean, not a slice, but
pizza,
we were
yeah.
at Windy City Pie, which I think is.
Yeah, first answer his question. Yeah.
I think they do the best Chicago pizza anywhere, including Chicago.
Yeah.
But
It's true.
I'd say for a pizza oven at home, it depends on the style of pizza you're making. But for, so for something like Neapolitan, you want it to be able to get to 900 Fahrenheit. But for a New York or other styles of pizza, like you only need it to get to like 650, 600. So ideally like 900, but it'll work with for other styles.
What's the best thing you've ever eaten?
The best thing I've ever eaten. Wow, man. You better take this question first while I think. The best thing? That's really hard. It's usually hard enough when people say, "So what's your favorite restaurant?" But the best thing we've ever eaten. What's the best thing we've ever eaten? Kenji's cooked a lot of the best things I've ever eaten. I'm not just saying that because he's sitting next to me.
I feel like it has to be for me, it has to be some kind of like fresh, raw seafood-ish thing. There was probably one sea urchin that was better than any other sea urchin, but I can't remember which one it was.
Yeah, or maybe it's Dave Pasternak's sea urchin pasta.
That's really good.
Dave Pasternak, I wrote a cookbook with him called The Young Man in the Sea. He has a restaurant called Esca, and he does this sea urchin pasta that is just one of the most delicious things you'll ever want to eat. So report back to me after you have some of that.
I just wanted to say first, your treatise on BLTs and the reverse sear prime rib recipes both changed my life. From Serious Eats. And then a question for Ed. Is a sort of a later stage founder, what's one thing that you wish you would have done differently going in as somebody that was sort of established going in and starting a business?
Yeah, I think I would have realized that it won't go according to plan. I convinced myself that it was going to be a straight shot to profitability and sustainability. And I think if my wife would ever give me permission to do one small thing again, that I would understand that, and I think that's a mistake that a lot of rookie entrepreneurs and small business owners make, is that you start to believe that things are going to go according to plan, and you just have to acknowledge that plans are something you have to make, but things will not go according to them. So I think that's the one thing I would say.
So recently, the LA Times had their two restaurant critics have kind of a discussion with one another in text about star ratings and how they relate to restaurant reviews. And one was kind of discussing, we shouldn't have star reviews, just like how Jonathan Gold did away with them, because they're too limited. It doesn't make sense to quantify food. And the other was kind of giving this other side of like, well, we can use them as this way of like, how does it succeed at what it's trying to be? And I was curious that Ed as a food writer and Kenji also as a food writer and now restaurant owner,
Sure.
What your perspectives were.
I go back and forth because we used to review restaurants on Serious Eats, as you probably know, and I was always trying to come up with a scale or a rating system. The reason people still use rating systems, however imperfect they are, is that it gives the reader something to hold on to, right? So it's like, oh, so this place gets 2 stars, or this place gets a 90, or this place gets a 95. It also makes the data
like much easier to aggregate.
Yeah. So I think it's a question that I don't think I can answer completely. I understand. The thing that makes the star system weird is that nobody can apply the stars consistently, right? So you don't know what the context of the stars is. So even my friend Pete Wells of the New York Times, whom I adore and who's a wonderful writer, and I think probably the best restaurant critic in America as far as I'm concerned, it's like even I go after reading his review, well, this reads like a 2-star review, and it's a 1-star, or this reads like a 3-star review, and why is he only giving it 2 stars? And there is no answer to that question, so I understand why people do it, and I don't know that you can do it any other way, and people are always trying to come up with a different kind of rating system. But I do think there's value, especially for eaters. It doesn't mean that it's perfect. Yeah.
I think there's some small value, but it also varies from source to source. Because I think stars represent a sort of impossible measure, like how good is something? It's like, what does that even mean? It's like, what does it mean? And so everybody has their different idea of what that means, and so. I generally tend to read individual reviewers a lot more than I trust like Yelp and aggregation sites, because individual reviewers, at least like I know, like when they're a good reviewer, they tell you and you actually read their review, they tell you what sort of criteria they're evaluating on, and you can judge from that like whether you agree with them or not. Whereas just a random number of stars like doesn't mean anything. Like I don't know who the audience is, who's giving those reviews. Personally, I think stars are not really useful for anyone because I don't think they reflect on any kind of reality that is going to be.
But some kind of rating system might make sense, even if it's not stars, or you're not even convinced of rating system.
I'm not convinced there's any rating system. Like more granular rating systems are a little better, where they can answer specific questions on like ambience versus food versus noise level, et cetera. Like I guess like that kind of stuff is useful. Mm-hmm.
It's a question that will never be answered, in a way that satisfies. First of all, in a way Kenji is both a food writer and now he's a chef restaurateur. So it's like.
Well, also maybe if like maybe if there's like AI built into Yelp and other aggregate review sites that more closely matches people who are likely to enjoy the similar things together and gets reviews based on that. Like maybe if if that works better, which I think it works better probably now with like Netflix and Amazon Prime and stuff. They do stuff like that.
Yeah, for sure.
Not perfectly successfulul, but at some point maybe that technology will get there, and then you'll only ever get recommended places that you're guaranteed to like, and then life will be completely boring.
It's true.
Yeah, same question to the both of you. Let's say you're going over to a good friend's house for dinner. You need to bring a side, something that is low effort, high impact, tasty. This is not a scenario.
Okay, I like this. Keep going.
I'm curious what either of you would bring.
What time does the potluck start? Or?
When you get there.
What's the question?
What do you bring to a potluck?
What do I bring to a potluck?
That you basically have to do nothing and everyone loves it.
Well, that's like asking me to pick stocks. If I told you my secret, I tend to bring things that I can assemble. So, Lisa Sharples is here. Whenever she comes to our office, which is like a nonstop party, like dinner party, she always brings mozzarella from the best mozzarella maker in New York, and then prosciutto from the same store. So you can't screw up slicing beautiful fresh mozzarella, layering some prosciutto on top of it, and then drizzling some good olive oil. So that's kind of my go-to jam. Kenji's going to tell you something much more.
No, I mean, I think it's the same principle, but like just something you can't screw up, and that can sit around for a long time, and like it's fine when it's cold, it's fine when it's half an hour old, it's fine when it's 2 hours old. I think I would make like this time of year, I'd probably make like there's good corn coming out, so I would probably make like a corn salad of some kind, like corn and radishes and celery and cilantro and lime and cheese.
He eats a lot of vegetables.
Yeah, corn. You can grill it before. You can just microwave it and just cut it off. And corn, corn is good because it's almost impossible to overcook. First of all, it's also very hard to undercook. Like it's good at a wide variety of. You can mess it up a lot of ways and it's still good, and it can sit for like 3 hours and it's still good.
Yeah. Or,
there you go.
This time of year in the Northwest and for the rest of the summer, it'd be hard to go wrong with just literally bringing some of the best stone fruit peaches or nectarines, just slicing it. And you don't even need balsamic vinegar. You don't need to bring ice cream. You just need to eat it. So that's maybe the other thing I would say.
Thanks.
You talked a little bit about wanting to win, and really that you thought refusing to lose was the key. But I think that it's really about losing and picking yourself back up one more time. Mm-hmm. So what was that loss for you, that defining key loss before Serious Eats?
Well, I actually lost my parents when I was a kid, and that, which you'll read about in the book, and I think that was the defining loss for me of my life, and that's what allowed me to see that I was resilient. So in that context, any business setback would seem insignificant, even though I wouldn't say to myself, well, this is insignificant compared to losing my parents. But I do think if you really go behind the headlines and you read about a lot of people who start businesses, that many of them have sustained significant losses, and they have found a way to rebound. And that sort of stands that, I know for me, even though it's a weird thing to say, it's like, if you can figure out a way to keep moving forward after setbacks like that, then business setbacks, they hurt. Don't get me wrong, they really hurt, but you know, it made it easier to find a way to keep going.
So this is more for Kenji. You've done a lot of experiments that I'm sure have helped a lot of the home cooks out in the audience over here. So I'm sure that also comes with some of the limitations of a home kitchen. So I'm just wondering if you had a chance to build your own like food lab test kitchen, what would that look like? What would you put in there?
I mean, I don't think it would look. I mean, I think a lot of the reason why the food lab and the stuff I write is successful is because it's limited to like home cooking, and so that keeps the audience. I mean, it's like, I think the fact that everything I write in my book and everything I've tested in my book I've done in just a home kitchen, I think really helps keep it grounded and makes sure that the end results are repeatable by like home cooks and by the audience that I'm writing for. So yes, I wouldn't change much. You know, like my kitchen's pretty nice. It's not. You know, it's normal. It's the only room in my house that hasn't been renovated, so it's kind of old. But
I had dinner at his house. Like, it's not that. The kitchen is not that special. I mean,
there's a closet. There's a closet full of like equipment and like stuff, like anything that anybody might own at home. I have at my place, and so that's nice.
It's very organized. It's extremely organized.
But I think it's pretty much how I want it, because I want to make sure that when I'm testing stuff that it's going to work in other people's houses. Or I would like to build an outdoor kitchen. That would be nice. That'd be nice. I think that's like on my list of projects to do.
So one question I have that are slightly different but complementary questions for both Ed and Kenji. As Ed, as somebody who lives in New York right now and has been covering the food scene there for a very long time, what do you think, you know, and as also covered the food scene across the country, what do you think is most missing from the food scene in New York? And Kenji, complementarily to that, as somebody who left there, what sort of food do you miss most from there?
So what is missing from the New York food scene? I think there's actually a dearth of good neighborhood restaurants. You know, because there's so much media attention lavished on restaurants in New York, probably in Seattle too at this point, and everywhere around the country, that any neighborhood restaurant that's really good becomes a restaurant that you need to make a reservation for a week in advance. Then it's not a neighborhood restaurant anymore, because shouldn't you be able to just walk into your neighborhood restaurant? And I don't know whether, and Kenji might be able to answer this question better than I can. I don't know whether it's because the financial aspects of running a restaurant can only support, you know, you really, all your tables have to be full, you know, almost all the time, because whether it's because the rents are so high or whatever. But I think if you asked anyone in New York, I think you'd get a similar answer, which is, and I don't know if it's true here, you know, can you get into your favorite neighborhood restaurants just by walking in? Yeah, see, that's great. You know, that's awesome, because I really miss that in New York.
As far as what I miss from New York, bagels and pizza.
Although somebody brought us some pretty good bagels tonight, right?
Yeah, they were pretty good. They were from
Pork and something
what's his name?
Where is it? Ballard.
Yes. What are they called? Pork chop and co?
Pork chop, that's right. And he just brought us bagels to the bar and he's like, I want you to try my bagels. And they were pretty good.
See, and Ed's complaining about not being able to get into restaurants in New York, and meanwhile he just sits somewhere in Seattle and people bring him food.
That's true. I suppose that's true. Go ahead.
I think we have 3 more questions, and I just want to say we'll get through those 3, and then we'll
All right.
done.
All right.
Hi, so this question is to the both of you. So I'm kind of curious if you could both share maybe one story or one concept that didn't make it into your books that you might have, in hindsight, wish you could have folded in. So Kenji, obviously your book came out a few years ago, so maybe in hindsight, what's something that along the way or, just since then that you've wish you could fold in? And then Ed, from you, kind of like maybe there's a story or an anecdote from your time at Serious Eats that just didn't really work its way into the book, so.
Well, for me, it would be, so when I started writing my books, I was still a freelance editor for Cooks Illustrated, and as Ed alluded, like they wanted to buy my book initially, and didn't give me a very bad offer, and so I said no, and then and part of their offer was that I would also have to stop writing for Serious Eats.
Yeah, they said, oh yeah, and you can't write for Serious Eats anymore.
Yeah, and so I told them no, and then and ended up selling my book to another publisher who did allow me to continue working for Serious Eats. And so I got a letter from Cooks Illustrated, from their lawyers, actually telling me, here's the contract you had with us, like here are the subjects that you cannot write about because you like researched them while you were working for us. And it was just a very, very long list of things. And so I took that to our lawyer and went over it, and I was told that like most likely it was unenforceable and that they were just trying to threaten you, but like it was like, all right, maybe I should stay away from most of these. And so in the end, I ended up there's a whole chapter on cooking meat, and like the one technique that I guess like is like my signature technique, the reverse sear, was something that I developed while I was at Cooks Illustrated. And so the ironic part, so I decided like, all right, I'm just going to leave it out. I won't put it in there because I don't want to ruffle any feathers. And then, of course, like there's many books and websites and stuff that have that printed now. And so like for this period, it felt like here's this technique that like I kind of came up with, and then everybody else in the world is allowed to write about it except for me. And so in retrospect, I feel like I probably could have put that in there, and there's not much they could have said or done. And it would have been nice to have it in there because it's actually like a method that I prefer, and there's a lot to say about it, and I just completely avoided it in the book. But all that information's on the website, so you don't even need it in the book, and it's all free on the website.
I think for me, my editor basically said, you can't put anything more about your days in the music business. He said, this is, it should be more about Serious Eats than your time in the music business. But there were so many things in the music business, so many experiences in the music business that were amazing. And one of them was, there's this great, no longer with us, arranger, Gil Evans. Does anybody know Gil Evans? Worked with Miles Davis on Sketches of Spain, and it was just was one of the greatest arrangers in the history of the music. And so Gil, I decided I got to know some of the members of Gil's band, and I was like, okay, I'm gonna find Gil Evans' work. And so I tried to put together a tour, and Gil's band was 17 pieces, right? So I said, and then I said to myself, gee, it's really hard, I'm just gonna ask Gil, could he go out on the road with 10 pieces instead of 17 pieces? I didn't realize it was like asking Picasso to paint with one brush. It was just one of these things where, and he just looked at me, and he was, I don't know, he was about 70 at the time, and he was just like, why would you ask me a question like that? So that was the answer. You could just do it the Silicon Valley way and say, we'll pay you for 10 pieces, but you can still bring the 17 if you want.
Right,
exactly. So, but there were so many, and they all are part of a theme, which is they were all, whether it's musicians or food people, that I wanted to get up on a soapbox and tell the world about. So there are so many stories that didn't make it into the book. The book was supposed to be 75,000 words long. I handed in 125,000. It ended up being 90,000. So If you see me after the show, I can give you many stories that didn't make it into the book.
Great, thanks for coming. Question for each of you. What kind of story or a recipe that you're most proud of, and what makes it stand out this much later?
Say that again.
What's like the favorite story or recipe you developed?
The biggest story, well, yeah, that's a good question. And I would have to, I assume you wanted to be on the site, which Kenji used to say to people, Ed used to write a lot for Serious Eats, because after a while it got harder as the business got more difficult.
There was a period when I was the only person on staff who had been there since the last time you had published a story.
That is cold, man. But true. I have reread some of the really great old stories, and that story that we wrote about the pastrami tasting, where we tried to get a pastrami mule to smuggle pastrami and smoked meat in from Canada, but they got busted. So the pastrami mule was busted, so all we got from Schwartz's in Montreal was the rye bread. Not really that helpful in a pastrami tasting. But I love those kinds of stories, and Kenji we once tried to arrange for a burger from In-N-Out. What was it?
I was in California and someone else was in New York, I think, and we both were meeting in Chicago, and so we timed it. So we synchronized our watches, and I bought an In-N-Out burger, and they bought a Five Guys burger, and we met in Chicago in the middle so that we could taste burgers that were had been through the same amount of degradation side by side.
I don't know.
My favorite story was, it was a story I wrote about why pepperoni slices curl, why some pepperoni curls and some doesn't. And I like that one a lot because it was, I started researching that thinking that the answer was obvious, and then it wasn't. It's not obvious. That nobody here, unless you've read it, you have no idea why. Nobody has any idea why pepperoni curls, unless you've read the story. But there's so many things that you think are it's the casing, it's the natural casing, or they get hotter on the top than on the bottom, and these things that seem so obvious, but then they're not. Yeah. And it was a very fun story to research because I talked to a lot of people about it, and then I had a friend who studies rheology at Cambridge University, and he built a model of a pepperoni slice that you can. That accurately reacts to heat, and it was fun. It was a lot of fun. I like stories like that where it's a very mundane, but I think important. It's it's important that your pepperoni curl.
And you discover surprising things about things.
Yes, yeah. The cool surprising things that you find with mundane tasks. Yeah, I'm working on a story about popcorn. And that's a pretty interesting one.
He loves popcorn, man. He has a serious popcorn Jones.
But through doing research for the story, I got to meet a guy who is a university professor whose job is to come up with new cultivars of popcorn. And so he sends me his favorite, so AP4152 if you can get it. Amazing popcorn.
Hey, Ed, I'm a huge fan of your podcast. I have just a quick question. This is not a big narrative thing. You seem to know every restaurant, every chef, every corner of New York. I've just always been curious. Do you do just a ton of research, or is this just what does it take to put on one of your podcasts?
Yeah, it's a weird thing. When I first met my wife and we would go on dates, and if we were on the bus, this was back in the late 70s, I'd say. That place has a great tuna sandwich. That place has the best bagels. That place has It's just one of those things that you accumulate knowledge, and you have to be willing to eat a lot of bad food.
But the thing is, most people go at most have 3 meals out a day, and in the last 2 days we've been to like 9 different restaurants.
Yeah, we have had 11. It's
and
true.
each
We have had 11 meals, but I always tell everyone who works at Serious Eats that the great ones learn to eat with pain.
But it really is just a matter of like actually just getting out there and networking and meeting. Like that's one of your great skills. That's why they keep you around at Serious Eats, really. Is that you know everybody, and you know everybody because you actually go out there and like to meet people.
Yeah, and I genuinely enjoy it, and thank you for that comment about special sauce. But I want special sauce to be real conversation, between, it's like you're overhearing a conversation between two people that you think have known each other for a long time, because I think it's hard to find real conversation either on the radio or on podcasts. And so that's what I strive for. I want you to think, God, I could never hear this stuff anywhere else. So
your 5-part treatise on pizza. I mean, that was a recent one. I don't know how long ago that was. That's real conversation.
That was
you didn't
great.
edit that into an hour. It was good.
Thank you. And thank you all for coming.
Thank you.
So we're going to have the signing in the lobby. If you exit that stairwell to my left and line up over there, Ed and Kenji will be just down there in a moment.